I've lived 71 years in Charleston, and most days pass like the tide, predictable, measured, and quiet. My name is Marjorie Lane, retired librarian, widow, keeper of routines. Every Thursday, I pick up dry cleaning for my son, Daniel, because he works too much and forgets little things. It's the sort of small favor mothers keep doing long after their children stop asking. That afternoon smelled of sea salt and fabric softener. The December light slanted gold over the cobblestones when I pushed open the door to Feldman's Dry Cleaners. The bell above it chimed a familiar note. Mr. Feldman, stooped and precise, looked up from the counter. He had pressed our family's clothes for 20 years, through birthdays, funerals, and every in-between. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Lane," he said, though his voice lacked its usual warmth. "I'm here for Daniel's coat, the beige one." I handed him the claim ticket, still faintly smudged with Daniel's handwriting. He studied the number longer than necessary. Behind his round glasses, his eyes shifted toward the window, then back to me. One moment, his accent, the trace of a vanished Europe, wavered. Steam hissed from the back room. When he returned, the coat hung neatly in plastic, but he didn't place it on the counter. He looked over his shoulder, lowered his voice. "Mrs. Lane, come with me, please." Something in his tone, formal, urgent, cut through the hum of machines. I followed him behind a curtain into the narrow room where he stored unclaimed orders. The air smelled of starch and heat. Mr. Feldman's hands trembled as he reached into a drawer and produced a small plastic bag. Inside lay a folded photograph and a slip of paper covered in numbers and Cyrillic letters. "I found this in your son's pocket," he said. "You must take your grandchildren and leave before sunrise." For a heartbeat, I couldn't speak. The photo showed Eli and Sophie in our backyard, sunlight catching their blonde hair, except someone had drawn thick red circles around their faces. The paper beside it bore a large transfer amount, dated 2 days ago. I'm sure it's a mistake. I managed, my throat dry. He met my eyes. "Please, Mrs. Lane, I've seen things like this before." The weight of the coat felt heavier when I finally took it. Outside, twilight pooled along the street, and the live oaks whispered in the wind, driving home. I kept hearing his words, the whisper that would not fade as the city lights blurred into trembling gold. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the porch light Daniel had installed last summer glowed against the humid dusk. Inside, the house smelled of garlic and tomato sauce, my small rebellion against unease. Thursday means spaghetti, I told myself. Eli was already setting the table, his tongue peeking out in concentration, while Sophie hummed along to the cartoon playing on the kitchen TV. Their laughter should have eased me, but it only made the whisper in my head louder. I slipped the small plastic bag into the flour tin behind the baking supplies, pressing the lid until it sealed with a soft pop. I couldn't bear to look at it again. It felt absurd, the kind of thing you'd read about in a newspaper. Not find in your son's coat pocket. Mr. Feldman must have been mistaken. Daniel wouldn't. My phone buzzed. Daniel's name lit the screen. "Mom, don't wait up tonight," he said quickly. His voice was tight, mechanical. "Long shift. Some logistics mess. You sound tired," I murmured. "Just stretch thin. I'll be fine." Before I could ask anything else, he hung up. I turned back to the bubbling pot, the rhythmic swirl of the spoon, the soft hiss of sauce. The children's chatter, all of it conspired to restore a fragile normal. Yet when I walked past Daniel's office to fetch napkins, something snagged my attention. 2 unopened boxes sat on his desk, each marked with foreign shipping labels. A sleek watch in a case I'd never seen before glinted beside his laptop. I closed the door gently, heart knocking against my ribs. For months, Daniel had spoken in fragments, clients overseas, temporary investments, just side work. I'd nodded, proud of his ambition, never pressing for details. But standing in that doorway, I realized I didn't actually know what my son did for a living anymore. In the living room, Eli and Sophie called for me to join them. I wiped my palms on my apron and smiled, a little too brightly, as if warmth alone could keep the cracks from widening. Sleep would not come. The house felt too still, the air too heavy, as if it held its breath with me. The clock on the nightstand glowed 1:47 a.m. Somewhere down the hall, the dryer ticked as it cooled. Daniel had run a late load before heading out. That small, domestic sound, once comforting, now made my pulse quicken. I rose quietly, careful not to wake the children, and padded down the hall in my slippers. The laundry room light buzzed faintly when I flipped it on. The smell of detergent and warm fabric wrapped around me. Daniel's hamper sat by the washer, a crumpled jacket draped on top. I told myself I was only checking pockets for receipts, the kind of habit that never quite leaves a mother. But my hands were trembling before I reached the lining. The jacket felt heavier than it should. I pressed my fingers along the seam and touched paper, a small envelope, folded twice. Inside were printed receipts, dates circled in pen, all for storage rentals near Charleston Harbor industrial addresses I recognized from the morning paper's crime section. A chill ran down my spine so sharp it made me dizzy. I set the envelope on the washer and stared at the laundry as if it might explain itself. The washer's silver drum reflected my face, pale and older than I remembered. I picked up my phone and typed a message before I could lose courage. Stopped by the cleaner today. The reply came almost instantly. You didn't tell anyone. Right. For a long moment, I just stared at the screen, feeling the blood drain from my hands. In the living room, the muted TV flickered a late news segment I'd left on earlier. The reporter's voice carried through the doorway. Interpol warns of expanding child trafficking routes using private shipping ports along the southern coast. The words blurred into a low hum as my knees weakened. I pressed a hand to the dryer for balance, the cool metal steady under my palm, while the rest of my world quietly tilted off its axis. By 2 a.m, the house had settled into the kind of silence that feels watchful. I sat at the kitchen table with the phone pressed to my ear, the glow from the range clock casting a faint green over my hands. The first ring barely finished before Della answered, her voice rough with sleep, but steady as always. Marjorie, can we visit for a few days? My voice wavered, and I hated how small it sounded. Della didn't ask questions, didn't fill the quiet with curiosity. Of course, she said simply. I'll make up the guest room. The certainty in her tone steadied me more than any plan could. I hung up and sat still for a moment, listening to the refrigerator hum. Then I stood and began to move. Careful and deliberate. I packed a small duffel from the hallway closet, toothbrushes, the allergy pills for Eli, Sophie's favorite pajamas, the stuffed turtle that had once belonged to their mother. I slipped a few bills from the emergency envelope I kept in the bread box, folded them into the side pocket. In my bedroom, the air smelled faintly of lavender and dust. I pulled a hollow book from the shelf, Pride and Prejudice, the edition Daniel had given me one Mother's Day, and slid my will and insurance papers inside. It felt strange, hiding proof of my life inside a story about love and propriety. The clock read 3:30 when I paused by the children's room. Moonlight spilled across their small bodies, breathing in unison, utterly trusting. I brushed a strand of hair from Sophie's forehead and whispered, "It's just a trip. My loves, just a little trip." A low rumble broke the stillness, the sound of a car turning into the drive. Headlights flashed briefly through the curtains. My heart thudded. Daniel wasn't supposed to be home until morning. I stepped back into the shadows, pressing the fabric of the drapes against my palms. The front door opened, hinges sighing softly, and the familiar creak of his footsteps moved through the hall. I held my breath, praying he wouldn't look in on us tonight. At 4 o'clock, the sky was still ink black, the kind of darkness that makes even the familiar look strange. I moved quickly, guided by the small circle of light from my phone. Eli stirred first when I slipped his jacket over his shoulders, murmuring something about school. Sophie blinked awake, clutching her stuffed turtle. "Shh," I whispered. "We're taking a little drive." "All right. Still dark out. So stay quiet for Grandma." They nodded, too drowsy to question. I carried the duffel bag to the porch, the screen door creaking in protest. Daniel's car sat in the driveway, dew glistening on the windshield. His bedroom light was off. I could hear the faint rhythm of his snoring through the thin walls as I led the children across the yard to my old Buick. The engine coughed before catching. Every sound felt too loud, the crunch of gravel, the metallic click of the gear shift. We rolled out of the driveway and onto the narrow road, past the moss-draped oaks that leaned over like sentinels. I didn't look back. The highway to Savannah stretched ahead, empty except for an occasional truck cutting through the fog. Marshland shimmered faintly under the moon, water silver and still. My hands gripped the steering wheel until they cramped. Halfway across the causeway, my phone began to buzz on the seat beside me. Daniel's name glowed on the screen, over and over. I let it ring until the sound became unbearable, then pressed silence. By the time the first hints of dawn touched the horizon, Eli had woken enough to watch the passing lights. "Grandma," he said quietly. "Are we in trouble?" I reached over and brushed his hair from his forehead. "No, honey, we're safe." He nodded, trusting me in the absolute way only a child can. When we crossed the state line, the sign for "Welcome to Georgia" flashed by in the early light. Only then did I let out the breath I'd been holding since the night before. The fog began to lift, revealing the faint pink edge of sunrise, and for the first time in hours, I believed we might actually make it. Della's house sat at the edge of Savannah's River Street, a small white bungalow tucked behind flowering magnolias. The air smelled faintly of salt and coffee when she opened the door. Still in her robe, her silver hair a soft halo in the porch light. "You drove all night," she said, pulling me into an embrace that felt like home. "Bring those babies in." Eli and Sophie stumbled past her, clutching their blankets. Within minutes, Della had them curled up on her sofa with toast and warm milk. I followed her into the kitchen, where the kettle was already whistling. She didn't ask for explanations, just poured coffee into 2 chipped mugs and waited. When I slid the photo and receipts across the table, her hand stopped midair. The light from the window caught the red circles drawn around my grandchildren's faces. She inhaled sharply. "Marjorie," she whispered, "this isn't something you can handle alone. You have to call the police." I shook my head. The steam from my cup blurred my vision. "If I'm wrong, I destroy him. If I'm right..." The words trailed off, too heavy to finish. Della reached across the table and covered my hand. "Then you save those kids. That's what matters." She disappeared down the hall and returned with her phone. "I'm calling Reeves," she said firmly. Captain Reeves arrived less than an hour later, still carrying the quiet authority that had followed him through 20 years with the Savannah police. His eyes were sharp but kind, his handshake steady. He studied the documents carefully, saying little. "These addresses," he murmured, tapping one receipt. "They're near the cargo docks. Not a place for personal storage." He looked up at me, expression grave. "Don't go back yet." Not until I know what we're dealing with. Outside, the river lapped softly against the pier, and a tugboat horn echoed in the distance. For the first time since leaving Charleston, the world seemed still. But beneath that fragile calm, dread pulsed like a second heartbeat. Captain Reeves called the next afternoon. His voice carried the weight of something he'd hoped not to confirm. Those addresses you gave me. Marjorie, they're part of an active FBI surveillance operation. Trafficking, large scale. Don't breathe a word of this to anyone yet. Not even Daniel. The words hollowed me out. I thanked him, promised to stay put, then hung up with shaking hands. But by evening, stillness became unbearable. I couldn't sit in Della's kitchen drinking coffee while questions clawed at me. I needed to see with my own eyes. Before dawn, I kissed the children's foreheads and told Della I was driving back for some clothes I'd forgotten. She didn't press, just watched me go with worry etched across her face. The road to Charleston felt endless, gray mist clinging to the marshes. When I reached our neighborhood, the streets were still quiet. Daniel's car was gone. My key slid into the lock as if nothing had changed. But the house no longer felt like mine. In his study, morning light spilled across neat piles of papers and unopened boxes. I'd cleaned that room 100 times, yet it felt foreign now. Above the desk hung a framed map of South America, a gift from his company. Something about its placement bothered me. The edges of the frame were worn differently than the others. I lifted it down. Behind it, faint lines in the plaster outlined a small square. My pulse hammered. Hidden beneath a layer of wallpaper was a safe, digital lock blinking red. It took 3 tries before instinct guided my fingers the children's birthdays. The safe clicked open with a soft sigh. Inside lay stacks of cash bound with foreign bank bands, 2 small passports with Eli's and Sophie's photos but different names, and 3 plane tickets to Panama, dated 2 days from now. The sight stole the breath from my lungs. I stood there, holding the passports, unable to reconcile the faces of my grandchildren with the future someone had planned for them. I forced myself to take photos, one after another, hands trembling. Then I closed the safe, hung the map, and left without looking back. Halfway down the highway, my phone rang. Daniel's name glowed on the screen. "Mom," he said, his voice calm and unfamiliar. "Where are you?" He found me faster than I expected. The call came while I was refueling outside Pooler, his voice low, deliberate. "We need to talk. Mom. Just us." The calmness in it frightened me more than anger ever could. He named a diner off I-95 halfway between Charleston and Savannah. I said yes before I could think of a reason to refuse. As soon as I hung up, I called Reeves. He listened without interrupting. "Don't confront him alone," he said finally. "My unit can stay close, unmarked. Let's see what he says." I agreed, though I knew he heard the tremor in my breath. The diner was the kind that smelled of burnt coffee and fried onions, its windows fogged by the morning rain. I chose a booth in the corner, facing the door. Daniel arrived 10 minutes late, wearing that same beige coat, the one that had started everything. He looked older than he had a week ago drawn, hollow around the eyes. "Mom," he said, sliding into the seat across from me. "Why did you run off like that? People are asking questions." I kept my hands folded in my lap. "What are you involved in?" "Daniel," he sighed, rubbing his temples. "You don't understand who I'm dealing with. I made mistakes. Bad ones. There were debts. Threats. You don't just walk away from these people." "Who are they?" He looked up sharply. "The kind who make sure your family pays if you talk." The waitress poured coffee we didn't touch. The hum of conversation around us felt miles away. I reached into my bag and placed the printed photos on the table. Images of the safe, the passports, the tickets. He stared at them, the muscles in his jaw tightening, the pretense drained from his face, leaving something cold behind. You should have stayed out of it. Mom, he said quietly, you don't know what you've done. For a heartbeat, I saw the boy he used to be, Freckles, scraped knees, the son who once promised to protect me when his father died. Then it was gone, replaced by a man I no longer recognized. The next morning broke gray and windless, the kind of coastal quiet that feels like a held breath before a storm. Reeves met me at the end of the Marina Road, his unmarked car parked between weathered fishing boats and stacks of netting. The plan was already in motion, agents scattered in plain clothes, cameras trained on the pier where the exchange was expected. He handed me a small radio. You'll stay in the car. If we need you to identify anyone, I'll signal. I nodded, though my hands were shaking. Through the windshield, I could see the water lapping softly against the docks. The sky the color of pewter. I kept thinking of the children asleep in Della's house, of how small they had looked curled beneath her quilts. At 10 minutes past noon, Daniel's car appeared at the far end of the pier. 2 men stepped out with him, both strangers in dark jackets, their movements brisk and practiced. Daniel's head was lowered, his shoulders hunched, as if he already carried the weight of what was coming. My breath caught when one of the men opened the trunk. They spoke briefly, gestures sharp. Then Daniel handed over a folder, the same brand as the ones from his office. Reeves's voice crackled through the radio. Now, the air erupted. Sirens split the stillness, and figures surged from behind shipping crates, federal agents shouting commands. One man bolted toward the boats. Another threw up his hands. Daniel froze for a fraction of a second before an agent tackled him to the dock. I stepped out of the car without realizing it, the wind whipping my hair across my face, Daniel's cheek pressed against the wooden boards, his wrists pulled behind him. When he saw me standing there, something inside him crumbled. I was trying to protect them. He whispered, breath ragged. I moved closer, voice trembling but clear. You almost destroyed them. The agents led him away. Around us, gulls screamed over the churned water, and the sun broke weakly through the clouds, touching everything with a pale, merciless light. 3 months passed before the world felt steady again. Daniel remained in federal custody in Charleston, awaiting trial. The papers called it an international logistics conspiracy. I couldn't bring myself to read beyond the headlines. Each article felt like reopening a wound that refused to close. In Savannah, the days unfolded gently, one after another. The children settled into a routine school in the mornings, homework and cartoons in the afternoons. Della's old house had become ours in quiet, unspoken ways. I cooked simple meals, kept the back porch swept, and every Saturday, we walked to the library downtown. Eventually, I began volunteering there again, shelving books in the same rhythm that once filled my life with order. Eli had grown taller. Sophie's laughter had returned. They still asked about their father sometimes. I told them he was somewhere safe, getting help. It wasn't the full truth, but it was the kind they could live with for now. At night, after they fell asleep, I often sat at the kitchen table with pen and paper. I tried to write to Daniel, to explain how love had turned into something sharper, how the same heart that once carried him had been forced to stop him. The words always dissolved halfway down the page. I never mailed a single letter. Spring came early that year. One morning, sunlight poured through the windows, warm and golden. The children were playing by the river, their voices carrying across the water like a song. I stood on the bank, feeling the breeze brush against my face. It struck me then safety wasn't luck, or even faith. It was love with boundaries. Love that learned where to draw the line and still hold on to grace. The river shimmered under the rising sun. I closed my eyes and let the warmth touch my skin, breathing deeply for what felt like the first time in a very long while.